Have you ever seen something on the side of the road that just felt wrong? A scene so out of place, it sends a shiver right down your spine, making you question if you should just keep driving or if you are meant to be a part of that moment. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday, on a long, empty stretch of Interstate 80, cutting through the heart of Wyoming. My name is Hank, and for 20 years, my home has been the cab of this Peterbilt truck. It's a lonely life, a life measured in miles and gallons of diesel. The hum of the tires on the pavement is the only real friend you have out here. You learn to embrace the solitude, to find comfort in the rhythm of the road, the endless river of asphalt that connects cities you only ever see the outskirts of. Have you ever felt a loneliness so deep it feels like a passenger in your own car? That was my normal. My everyday was just me, my rig, and the ghosts of thousands of miles behind me. The job teaches you to be cautious, to mind your own business, to build a wall around yourself because the highway can be an unforgiving place. You see things, strange things, but you learn to look away. You learn that getting involved is a risk you cannot afford. But that morning was different. The sun was just a rumor on the horizon, painting the edges of the clouds in a faint, grayish light. It was that quiet, in-between time when the world feels like it's holding its breath. And that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a dot in the distance, a dark speck against the pale shoulder of the road. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a piece of a blown-out tire. As I closed the distance, my foot steady on the accelerator, the dot took shape. It was a man. An old man walking with a slow, deliberate shuffle that spoke of pure exhaustion. He was pulling a single, old-fashioned suitcase with one hand, the kind your grandpa might have owned. Interstates are for machines, for tons of steel moving at 70 miles an hour. They are not for people, especially not for an elderly man, walking with everything he owns in a single, battered case. My mind was screaming all the usual warnings, the stories you hear at truck stops about scams and decoys. But my gut was telling a different story. Stick with me on this, because what happens next, well, it is the kind of thing that only happens once in a lifetime. As I got closer, I could see him more clearly now. His shoulders were slumped in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with defeat. His clothes were worn out, and even from inside my cab, I could feel the profound sadness hanging around him like a shroud. This was not a man taking a morning stroll. This was a man at the end of his rope. My hand was steady on the wheel, ready to just keep going, to let this image fade in my rearview mirror like so many others. What you are about to discover might just change how you see the next stranger on the side of the road. Something in my gut, a voice I had learned to ignore for years, was screaming at me to slow down. And I have to ask you, have you ever been in a situation like that? A moment where your head is screaming no, but your heart is whispering yes. If this story is already starting to connect with you, if you have ever faced that choice between caution and compassion, I would love to read about it in the comments. Your stories, your experiences, they build a real community right here. And honestly, seeing them makes this lonely road feel a little less empty. When you take a second to hit that like button, it does more than just support the video. It tells the whole platform that these kinds of human stories matter, that they are worth sharing with more people. People who might just need to hear a story like this one today. And if you believe that we need more stories about connection in the world, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It is the single best way to tell me that you want to keep traveling down this road together, to see where it leads. I took a deep breath, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, and I chose to listen to my heart. The powerful hiss of the air brakes shattered the morning quiet as I eased the 18-wheeler onto the wide shoulder, a few yards ahead of the old man. The engine idled with a low rumble, a sleeping giant. I watched him in the side mirror as he slowly, cautiously approached. He stopped about 10 feet away, looking at the massive truck with a mix of fear and exhaustion. I leaned over and rolled down the passenger window. The air that came in was cool and smelled of dust and sagebrush. My voice was rough when it finally came out, gravelly from hours of silence. Bom dia, Betrayal. Ta tutto certo per AI. He just looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears that had not yet fallen, and he did not say a word. That silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. A silence so heavy, it was louder than the idling engine. My brain was a war zone, every instinct for self-preservation firing off at once. For 20 years on this road, I have followed one simple rule: you don't stop. You just don't. Every trucker knows the stories, the cautionary tales shared over burnt coffee and late-night diners. You hear about the friendly wave that turns into a nightmare, the person feigning distress only to lead you into a trap. These are not just urban legends. They are the harsh reality of this journey. The road teaches you to be cynical. It hardens you, because trusting the wrong person can cost you your cargo, your truck, or even your life. My mind raced through a catalog of horrors, every story I had ever been told. I was playing a dangerous game, one of the most critical decisions of my life, with my truck, my career, and my safety on the line. It was a test of my mindset, a mindset forged over 1,000,000 miles of solitude and suspicion. But then I really looked at him. I looked past the warnings and the what-ifs. I saw the deep lines etched into his face, a roadmap of a hard life. I saw the slight tremor in his hand as it rested on that worn-out suitcase. I saw the raw, unfiltered pain in his eyes, a depth of despair that no con artist could fake. This was not a predator lying in wait. This was a man who had been shattered. It was one of those moments in life, a fork in the road where a simple choice can change the entire trajectory of your journey. I realized that my decision was not just about safety. It was about humanity. It was about the kind of man I wanted to be after all these years alone. The impact of driving away, of leaving him there, suddenly felt heavier than any potential danger. And in that instant, the choice was made. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. The door of the cab opened with a heavy groan, and I swung myself down to the ground. The asphalt was solid beneath my boots. I was taller than him, and as I walked closer, I tried to make myself seem smaller, less intimidating. I kept a safe distance, but closed the gap enough to speak without shouting. "I am not going to hurt you," I said, my voice softer now. "I am just a guy driving a truck. Where are you headed, partner?" He looked from my eyes to my truck, and then down at the cracked pavement, as if the answer was written there in the dust. He took a shaky breath, and when he finally spoke, his voice was a fragile whisper, barely carried on the wind. "To any place," he said, "where I can be treated like a human being." Now I want to go even deeper into this, because that one sentence hit me harder than a crosswind on a high bridge. It was not just a destination. It was a plea. It was a revelation. The first piece of a hidden truth that was far more complex and heartbreaking than I could ever imagine. That single sentence explained everything and nothing all at once. It told me that the danger was not what he might do to me, but what had already been done to him. It was a key, and it had just unlocked a door inside me, a door I had kept bolted shut for years. What lay behind that door was a story that would unravel over the next few hours, a story of family, betrayal, and a secret so heavy it was a miracle he could still walk at all. Comment below with the words, "Trust your gut," if you have ever felt that same pull. There was nothing left to say after that. Any man with a shred of decency knows what he has to do. I gestured toward the passenger door. "There is plenty of room in the cab," I told him. "I can take you as far as Cheyenne, maybe further." He hesitated. For a moment, his eyes scanning my face, looking for the catch, for the angle. It is a look you see in people who have been let down so many times they have forgotten what genuine kindness looks like. This was a critical part of his journey, his decision to trust one more time. He gave a slow, weary nod. I walked with him to the passenger side and opened the heavy door. He struggled to climb up, his old bones protesting with every move. I gave him a hand, and his arm felt as thin and fragile as a bird's wing. He settled into the passenger seat, which seemed to swallow him whole, and placed a small, worn bag between his feet. I walked back around, grabbed his suitcase, and felt a jolt of surprise. It was heavy, far heavier than it should have been for a man his size. I did not say anything, just swung it up into the cab and placed it behind the seats. I climbed back in, shut the door, and the world outside disappeared. Inside the cab, there was only the hum of the engine and a silence thick with unspoken questions. I eased the truck back onto the highway, the tires eating up the miles as we moved on. For the next 30 minutes, neither of us said a word. He just stared out the window, his gaze fixed on the endless expanse of sagebrush and sky, but I knew he was not really seeing it. He was watching a different landscape, a memory playing out behind his eyes. The silence was not peaceful. It was a loud, aching void filled with his sorrow. I tried to imagine what could lead a man to this point. To be walking alone on an interstate with his life packed into a single suitcase. I turned on the radio, keeping the volume low, hoping a bit of old country music might soften the edges of the tension. It did not. I decided to try again. "I have got some coffee in this thermos here," I said, my voice quiet, "and some crackers if you are hungry. It is not much, but it is something." He slowly turned his head away from the window and looked at me. He shook his head just once, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Then he turned back to the window. I let it go. I knew this was not a time for pushing. This was a time for patience. I just drove, my hands steady on the wheel, my eyes on the road ahead. But my mind was in the passenger seat, sitting right there with him in that suffocating silence. His pain was a tangible thing, a presence in the cab that was as real as the smell of diesel and dust. It was a profound transformation of the space. My truck had ceased to be just a workplace. It had become a sanctuary, a witness to a story that was still a complete mystery to me. Another hour crawled by. The sun was higher now, burning off the morning chill. We passed other trucks, there, drivers giving the customary wave, but my world had shrunk to the confines of this cab. Finally, just as I was starting to accept that we might drive all the way to Nebraska without another word, he spoke. He did not turn to look at me. He just kept staring out the window, his voice so low, I almost did not hear it over the engine. He said, "My children put me out." Now I want to go even deeper into this, because those 5 words changed everything. They were not just a confession, they were a verdict. A judgment handed down by the very people who should have been his protectors. The hidden truth I had been sensing was suddenly laid bare, and it was uglier than anything I had imagined. It reframed his entire presence. He was not just a victim of circumstance. He was a refugee from his own family. That revelation shifted the entire foundation of the moment. The questions I had were no longer about what happened, but how. How could a child do that to a parent? What kind of darkness has to take root in a person's heart for them to throw away their own father? The weight in the cab suddenly intensified, but it was no longer just the weight of his sadness. It was the weight of an unthinkable betrayal. And I knew, right then and there, that this was no longer just a ride. This was a rescue. Comment the word kindness below if you believe it is the one thing that can change a life. I swallowed hard, the words hanging in the air between us like thick smoke. My children put me out. There is no training for that moment, no manual for what to say. Sorry felt cheap. Angry felt useless. So I just drove, my knuckles tight on them. Wheel. I kept my eyes on the white lines, those steady, painted markers that gave this chaotic world a brief illusion of order. After a minute of my own silence, I just nodded. I understand, I said, though I did not. Not really. How could anyone? I was a man who grew up without a father around. The absence of a dad was the defining hole in my own story. But this was different. This was not absence. This was a deliberate act of cruelty, a betrayal so profound it felt like it could tear a hole in the fabric of the universe. He must have heard the honesty in my voice, because he began to talk. The words came slowly at first, like he was pulling them up from a deep, dark well. He told me his name was Samuel. He had lived his whole life on a piece of land his grandfather had homesteaded. He had worked that land, raised a family on it, and buried his wife there 5 years ago. He painted a picture of a life that was hard but good, a life built on sweat and seasons, not dollars and cents. The story of his journey started to unfold, not the one on this interstate, but the one that led him here. Then he told me about the sale. The land had become too much for him to handle alone, and his 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, convinced him it was time to sell. The property was close to a growing city, and the offer they got was staggering. Life-changing. Money. He thought it would be a blessing, a final gift to his kids, a chance for him to live out his days in peace, knowing they were secure. But he was wrong. The money was not a blessing. It was a poison. He described how the tone of their phone calls changed. Visits became less about him and more about his bank account. They started calling him old, forgetful, confused. They would talk to each other in hushed tones when they thought he was not listening, using words like power of attorney and incompetence. They were not just abandoning him. They were systematically trying to erase him, to have him declared mentally unfit so they could gain control of the fortune he had given them. It was a cold, calculated campaign, a look behind the scenes of a family's total moral collapse. The transformation was terrifying. These were the same children he had taught to ride a bike, the same children he had sat with when they were sick. And now they looked at him and saw nothing but an obstacle. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because this was not just a story about a family fighting over money. This was about the terrifying power of greed to corrupt the human heart. I was witnessing the devastating impact of their decisions, a series of choices that led them to sacrifice their own father for a bank balance. The hidden truth was that the money did not change them. It just revealed who they truly were all along. Their mindset had shifted from love to ledgers, from family to finance. And the revelations kept coming. He told me about the day his youngest son sat him down and told him they had found a nice facility for him, a place where he could be safe. Samuel knew it was a prison disguised as a nursing home. That was when he knew he had to run. He told me how he packed a single suitcase, took what he could, and walked out of the house he had built with his own hands before they could come back and lock the door behind him. He had been on the road for days, sleeping in bus stations, eating whatever he could afford, running from the memory of his children's faces, faces that had once looked at him with love and now only looked at him with cold, hard ambition. Comment below with the word legacy if you believe what we leave behind is more than just money. His story hung in the cab, a heavy ghost that settled in the seat between us. I drove for another hour, the Wyoming landscape blurring past, but I was not seeing it. I was seeing a family portrait cracking and falling apart. I knew I had to get off the road, at least for a little while. His story was too heavy to carry. At 70 miles an hour, up ahead, I saw the sign for a small town, one of those places with a single blinking traffic light and a diner that has been there forever. I flicked on my turn signal. "I'm buying you lunch, Samuel," I said. "And that is not a request." For the first time, a flicker of something other than pain crossed his face. Maybe it was surprise. He just nodded. We pulled into the parking lot of the Blue Plate Diner, a classic spot with a faded sign and cracked red vinyl on the booths. The smell of frying bacon and old coffee hit me as soon as I opened the door. It was the smell of 1,000 truck stops, but today it smelled like a small moment of peace. I went around to help him down, and then I reached into the cab to get his suitcase. The moment my hand closed around the handle, I almost stumbled. It felt like it was full of bricks, a dense, concentrated weight that made no sense. I managed to swing it down without showing my surprise and made a joke as I set it on the ground. "What are you carrying in here, old-timer?" "A box of rocks." He did not smile. He looked at the suitcase, then at me, and his voice was serious almost. A whisper. He said, "Everything that is left of my life." The comment silenced me immediately. The weight suddenly felt different, heavier, and it had nothing to do with gravity. We sat down in a booth by the window. I ordered us both the daily special, pot roast and mashed potatoes, and 2 black coffees. He ate slowly, his hands trembling slightly, like a man who had forgotten what it felt like to sit at a table and be served a hot meal. The silence between us was different now. It was not empty. It was filled with the story he had told me. As he was finishing his meal, he started breathing a little heavily, a slight wheeze in his chest. He put his hand to his heart. "My pills," he said, his voice strained. "I need to take one. They are in the suitcase." "Of course," I said, pulling the heavy case from the floor and setting it on the seat beside him. He looked at me, his eyes searching. My face one last time, a final, silent question. It was a moment of profound trust, a transfer of his entire world into my hands. Then he said, "You open it. The zipper is stuck sometimes." I pulled the suitcase closer. The zipper was old and stiff, but it moved under my hand. I pulled it open just enough for him to reach inside, and my world just stopped. Because under a layer of neatly folded clothes and an old, worn Bible was money. Stacks and stacks of it. Bundles of $100 bills and 50s, wrapped in simple rubber bands, packed so tightly they filled the entire bottom of the case. It was not just a lot of money. It was an impossible amount of money. The sounds of the diner faded away. The clatter of plates, the murmur of conversations, it all just disappeared. All I could see were those stacks of cash. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the secret. This was the reason for the wait. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because that suitcase was not just full of money. It was full of betrayal. It was the physical manifestation of his entire tragedy. This was the hidden truth made real. Each bundle of cash was a piece of the poison that had corrupted his family, the very thing that had turned his children into strangers. I was staring at the motive for the crime. It was the behind the scenes of his family's transformation, the ledger that showed the true cost of their decisions. The impact of seeing it right there on the red vinyl seat of a roadside diner was overwhelming. It explained his escape, his fear, his sorrow. He was not just running from his children. He was running with the very thing they wanted more than him. And suddenly, my journey with this old man became infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. Comment the word burden below if you understand that some weight is not. Measured in pounds. My mind went blank. Every thought I had just evaporated, replaced by the image of all that cash. For a split second, the world became very simple. It reduced itself to me, this old man, and a suitcase that held more money than I would ever see in 10 lifetimes of driving this truck. The devil on my shoulder started whispering, the way he always does out here on the lonely stretches of road. He whispered about my debts, about the repairs my truck needed, about the dream I once had of buying a small piece of land and finally putting the keys away for good. The temptation was a physical thing, a jolt of electricity that shot through my veins. This was the ultimate test of a man's mindset, the kind of decision that reveals the truth of who you are when nobody is looking. Or so I thought, but then I looked up from the money and into Samuel's eyes, and he was not looking at the suitcase. He was looking at me. He was not just showing me the money, he was showing me his wound. He was watching to see what I would do. It was not a test of my character for my own sake. It was a test for his. He was putting the last piece of his faith in humanity on the table, right here in this greasy spoon diner, and I was the one who had to prove it was not a mistake. All the stories, all the warnings from other truckers, they did not matter anymore. This was not about a scam or a setup. This was a man's soul laid bare. I was seeing the behind the scenes of his desperate journey, and the price of his ticket was trust. In that moment, the money looked ugly. It looked like the source of all. His pain, it was not a treasure. It was a cancer. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out and took hold of the zipper. I did not grab for a single bill. I did not even hesitate. I just pulled the zipper closed, the sound of it cutting through the diner's ambiance like a final, definitive statement. I pushed the suitcase back toward him on the vinyl seat. Then I leaned forward, looked him straight in the eye, and said the only thing that felt true. Your secret is safe with me, Samuel. I am not interested in your money. He just stared at me for a long moment, and then something incredible happened. He deflated. Every ounce of tension seemed to drain out of his frail body. He let out a breath he must have been holding since he walked out of his own front door. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path through the deep lines on his cheek. He did not wipe it away. He just gave me a small, trembling nod. It was a nod that said more than any words ever could. It said thank you. It said I chose right. It said maybe, just maybe, there was still some good left in this world. The transformation was immediate. He was no longer just a passenger. And I was no longer just a driver. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because my reaction was not about being a good person or a saint. It was a selfish decision in its own way. It was about choosing the kind of world I wanted to live in. A world where an old man's life is worth more than the contents of his suitcase. That one decision changed the entire impact of our meeting. It was the revelation that shifted everything. The hidden truth is that money can buy you a lot of things, but it cannot buy you character. It cannot buy you peace. And it sure as hell cannot buy you a second chance at being a decent human being. I looked at the pot roast on my plate, now cold, and I realized I had never been less hungry for food and more hungry for something else, something I could not even name yet. I knew right then that my journey with Samuel was no longer about getting him to the next town. It was about seeing him through to the end of this storm, wherever that might lead. Write the words human value in the comments. If you believe our worth is not in our wallets. We paid the bill and walked back out into the bright Wyoming sun. The world felt different, sharper. The air seemed cleaner. Getting back into the truck was not the same as before. The heavy silence was gone, replaced by a fragile, unspoken trust. The secret was out, but now a new question hung in the air. A question, even heavier than the suitcase. What now? I could not just drop him off at the next bus station. I could not leave this old man with a fortune in cash to fend for himself. He would be a target for every predator and parasite from here to the coast. The thought of it made my stomach churn. My simple act of giving a man a ride had turned into a profound responsibility. The journey was no longer about miles on a map. It had become a moral compass, and every direction it pointed was toward complication and danger. As I drove, I started thinking about my own life, my own empty spaces. I have a house, a small one-story place just outside of North Platte, Nebraska. It is nothing special. Just a place I bought years ago to have a mailing address, a spot to park the rig and wash my clothes between hauls. Mostly, it is just quiet. It is a place where the silence is so loud it rings in your ears. I would spend a few days there at a time, surrounded by furniture that was just functional, walls that held no memories, and a stillness that always reminded me I was alone. I had run from that silence my whole life, choosing the rumble of the engine and the constant motion of the highway instead. But for the first time, I saw that house not as an empty shell, but as a possibility, a refuge, a place that could offer a man like Samuel something his own home no longer could. Safety. The decision formed in my mind slowly, then all at once. It was a terrifying thought, inviting a stranger, a man with a suitcase full of secrets and money, into my life, into my home. It went against every rule I had ever lived by. But the man I was when I woke up this morning was not the same man sitting behind the wheel now. Seeing Samuel's pain, seeing his quiet dignity in the face of such a profound betrayal, had triggered a transformation in me. It had flipped a switch. My own loneliness suddenly seemed like a luxury compared to his. I looked over at him. He had his eyes closed, not sleeping, just resting. He looked like a man who had not had a moment of real peace in a very long time. This was another one of those crossroads, a decision that would change the entire impact of my journey. And I knew I had to take the turn. I cleared my throat. "Samuel," I said, my voice steady. "When we get to Nebraska, I have a place, a little house. It is not much, but it is warm, and the door has a lock. There is an extra bed, and nobody in the world knows where it is except me. You could stay there for a while. Rest up. Figure out your next move without having to look over your shoulder. There is no charge, no catch. It is just a place to be safe." He opened his eyes and turned to look at me fully for the first time. His expression was one of absolute shock, of disbelief. So profound it almost looked like suspicion. He studied my face, searching for the angle, the hidden claws. He had been betrayed by his own blood, so how could he possibly trust a stranger? But all he saw was me, a tired trucker with a conscience. He did not say yes. He did not have to. His eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because that invitation was the real moment of truth, more than zipping the suitcase, more than the pot roast. It was the moment where my simple gesture of a ride evolved into a commitment, a true act of shelter. The hidden truth of our journey is that we were both adrift. He was a man without a home, and I was a man who had a house, but had never really been home. I was offering him a roof and four walls, but the revelation that was dawning on me was that maybe he was offering me something more. The impact of that one decision was about to ripple through both of our lives in ways I could not yet imagine. I was looking at the behind the scenes of my own life and realizing how empty it had become. And I was starting to understand that maybe, just maybe, by giving this man a refuge, I was finally building one for myself. Write the word shelter below if you believe everyone deserves a safe place to land on. We drove the last few hundred miles across the Nebraska plains as the sun began to set. The conversation we had in the diner, the shared secret of the suitcase, it had changed the air in the cab. The tension was gone, but it was replaced by something else, something fragile and uncertain, like the first light of dawn. We were no longer just a trucker and a passenger. We were two people bound by a strange and heavy secret, heading toward an unknown future. When we finally rolled into North Platte, the streetlights were on, casting a lonely glow on the quiet. Streets. I turned down my road, a simple lane on the edge of town, and pulled my rig to a stop in a long gravel driveway next to my house. It looked just as I had left it, dark and still, more like a storage unit for a life than a place where one was actually lived. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was profound. "This is it," I said softly. "Home sweet home, or something like it." I helped him down from the cab, his feet touching the solid ground as if he were stepping onto a new continent. I grabbed his suitcase, the weight of it a familiar shock now, and walked to the front door. The key felt strange in my hand. I unlocked the door and pushed it open into a space that smelled of stale air and solitude. I flipped a switch, and a dim yellow light filled the small living room. It was not much to look at. A plain couch, a worn-out armchair, a television that was rarely on. It was the house of a man who was never really there. Samuel stood in the doorway, clutching his small bag, looking around not with judgment, but with a kind of quiet wonder, like a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be inside a home. I put the heavy suitcase in the corner of the room. It sat there, a dark and silent monument to the journey that had brought us here. It felt out of place, like a piece of the harsh outside world that had followed us inside. "Go on, sit down," I told him, gesturing to the armchair. "I am going to make some coffee. That is what you do, right? When you bring someone into your home, you make coffee. It is in the rule book somewhere." He gave me a small, tired smile and slowly lowered himself into the chair. As I moved around the kitchen, the simple act of making coffee for two felt revolutionary. The sound of the water running, the clink of the mugs, the rich aroma filling the stale air. It was all part of a domestic ritual I had never shared with anyone. This was the first major impact of my decision. This simple transformation of my empty house into a space occupied by two souls instead of one. I handed him a mug, and he held it in both hands, letting the warmth seep into his old bones. We did not talk much that first night. There was nothing left to say that had not already been said on the road. I showed him to the spare bedroom, a room that had held nothing but dust and forgotten boxes for years. The bed had clean sheets, and I had put a glass of water on the nightstand. "Rest up, Samuel," I said from the doorway. "You are safe here." He looked at me from the edge of the bed, and his eyes said everything his mouth could not. After I closed his door, I stood in the hallway of my own house, and it felt like a completely different place. The silence was still there, but it was no longer the oppressive, lonely silence I was used to. It was the quiet of a house that was sheltering someone, the quiet of a house that had a purpose. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the days that followed were a quiet revelation. A new routine began to form, organically, without any discussion. I would wake up to the smell of coffee already brewing. I would find him sitting on the back porch, watching the sunrise, a Bible open on his lap. We started sharing meals at the small kitchen table. The conversations shifted away from the painful past and moved toward the simple present. He would ask about my truck, about the places I had been. I would ask him about his wife, about the land he used to farm. We were filling in the empty spaces in each other's stories. I was getting a look at the behind the scenes of a life well lived before the tragic final act. And in sharing that, he started to come back to life. A bit of color returned to his cheeks. The tremor in his hands lessened. The haunted look in his eyes began to be replaced by a calm, steady gaze. The hidden truth of our arrangement was that I thought I was offering him shelter, but he was the one who was making my house a home. I grew up without a father, and he was a father who had been thrown away by his sons. We were two sides of the same broken coin. And here, in this quiet little house in Nebraska, we were becoming a family. It was a slow, beautiful transformation. A journey I never knew I needed to take. Write the word connection below if you believe we find family in the most unexpected places. 2 years have passed since that day on the Wyoming Interstate. 2 years since my truck, my life, and my heart made a stop that changed everything. It is funny how time works. Some days feel like a lifetime, and then you blink and entire seasons have come and gone. The house is not the same place I brought him to that first night. The silence is gone, replaced by the low murmur of a television in the afternoon or the sound of Samuel humming an old hymn while he tends to the small garden he planted in the backyard. That patch of dirt had been nothing but weeds for a decade. Now it is full of tomatoes and cucumbers. He has made friends with the neighbors, who know him as Mr. Sam, the trucker's dad. He tells them stories, gives them gardening tips, and has become a quiet, gentle fixture on our little street. The transformation is astounding. The man who arrived here, broken and defeated, is gone. In his place is a man with a sparkle in his eye, a man who laughs from the belly, a man who has found a purpose again. And what about me? The biggest change might have been in me. I still drive. I still haul freight from one coast to the other. But the road feels different now. I no longer drive to escape the silence. I drive knowing there is a light on for me at home. I drive knowing someone will be waiting on the porch, ready with a cup of coffee and an ear to listen to my stories from the road. My house is no longer just a place to park my rig. It is the destination. It is the anchor in the storm of my life. My entire mindset about my own journey has shifted. I spent so many years thinking that my life was about the miles, about the independence, about being alone. But the truth, the real hidden truth, was that I was just lonely, and I did not even realize how much until I was not anymore. And the suitcase. I know you are wondering about the suitcase. It is still here. It is in the back of the closet in his room, under a stack of old blankets. I see it sometimes when I am putting things away. It is covered in a thin layer of dust now, a forgotten artifact from a past that feels like it belongs to 2 other people. We have never spoken of it again, not once. There was no need. The day I zipped it shut in that diner, we made a silent pact. The money had no power here. It was the cause of the wound, but it would not be part of the healing. What it represents, the greed, the betrayal, that all stayed inside the leather walls of that case. Its power was neutralized by a simple human decision, the choice to see a man instead of a jackpot. The impact of that choice is something I think about every single day. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the greatest revelation of this entire journey was not discovering a suitcase full of cash. It was discovering what real wealth looks like. It is not stacks of $100 bills. It is the sound of shared laughter in a quiet kitchen. It is having someone to worry about and knowing someone worries about you. It is the simple comfort of presence. The fortune his children fought over is nothing more than paper and ink collecting dust in a closet. The real treasure, the priceless treasure, is the family we built from the scraps of 2 broken lives. It is the legacy we are creating. Every single day, in every shared meal, in every conversation on the back porch, we found a fortune that cannot be spent and can never be stolen. And the incredible hidden truth is that it was there all along, waiting for someone to just stop, to listen, and to choose kindness over everything else. Write the word treasure below. If you know that the best things in life are not things at all, that we sit out on the back porch most evenings now, when the Nebraska sky turns that deep shade of orange and purple. He sips his coffee, and I nurse a glass of iced tea. The other night, he was quiet for a long time, just watching the fireflies start to blink in the twilight. He turned to me, a small, peaceful smile on his face, and said, "You know, Hank, I have read in my Bible that the Lord works in mysterious ways, But I never truly understood it until you stopped that truck. He took another sip of coffee. I thought my journey was over that day. Turns out, I was just finally getting on the right road. I did not say anything back. I just nodded and looked out at the garden he had brought back to life. In that moment, watching this man who had become my father, I understood that he was right. My journey had not just been about hauling freight. It had been about finally arriving somewhere that mattered. This whole story, this entire life-altering experience, it all comes down to a single moment. A single decision made on a lonely stretch of highway at the crack of dawn. It was a choice between fear and faith, between cynicism and compassion, between the man I had always been and the man I could be. It is easy to look back now and say it was the right choice, but in that moment, with all the warnings and all the risks screaming in my head, it was the hardest decision I have ever made. And the impact of that one choice has been a tidal wave, a complete and total transformation of my world. It showed me that my own mentality, the one I had built to protect myself, was actually a prison. And by choosing to help him, I was really choosing to break myself free. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the ultimate hidden truth of this journey is not about finding a lost old man or a suitcase full of money. The final revelation is about finding yourself. I spent 2 decades on the road thinking I was free, but my life was on a loop. The same highways, the same truck stops, the same loneliness. That morning, I broke the loop. I took a detour, and that detour led me home. It led me to a family I never knew I was missing. It led me to a richness that has nothing to do with a bank account and everything to do with a shared cup of coffee on a quiet evening. The real behind the scenes of this story is that sometimes the greatest treasures are disguised as our greatest burdens. And sometimes the only way to save yourself is to stop and save someone else. So this brings me to you. I have shared my story, my whole journey, from that first glimpse of a man on the side of the road to this peaceful evening on the porch. And now I have to ask you the question that I have asked myself 1,000 times. Since that day, what would you have done? Be honest with yourself. With the world being what it is, with all the stories you hear and all the reasons to be afraid, would you have kept driving? Or would you have stopped? Would you have opened your door to a stranger with a broken heart and a soul full of secrets? Your answer says a lot about you. And if you think this story about a roadside miracle was something, you should stick around for the next one. Because that decision to stop opened up a part of my life I never knew existed, and it led to another journey, another haul, where I found a locked box in a shipment of old furniture that held a secret even crazier than a suitcase full of cash. Right. The words one stop below, if you believe a single moment of kindness can change a life forever. And that is really the heart of it all. The fact that you stayed with me through this whole story, from that lonely highway to this quiet back porch, it means a lot. It tells me that you understand. If you felt that connection we have been talking about, if this story made you feel something real, hitting that like button lets me know that we are on the same page, that these are the kinds of stories that still matter. I plan on sharing more of what I have learned out here on the road, more of these moments that change you. If you want to keep riding shotgun for those, the best way to make sure you do not miss the next haul is to subscribe to the channel. It would mean the world to me to know you were here for the whole journey. Just do me a favor and leave a comment below that says, I would have stopped. That way I will know this journey is far from over. In fact, that decision to stop opened a door to a whole new set of stories. There is a video popping up on your screen right now that picks up where this one leaves off, the one about the locked box. Go ahead and click on it and let us see where the road takes us next.